The unsolved death of Kendrick Johnson. It was the second day back at school after the winter break. On the morning of January 11th, 2013, Lowndes High School in Valdosta, Georgia, buzzed with the return of students, some still sleepy, others excited to be back among friends. The long beige hallways of the building, lined with lockers and lit by fluorescent bulbs, echoed with the shuffle of feet and the clatter of books. No one could have guessed that by the end of that day, the school would become the center of one of the most haunting and controversial unsolved deaths in modern American history. 17-year-old Kendrick Johnson was a well-known presence at Lowndes High. A three-sport athlete, he was fast on the football field, confident on the basketball court, and known for his gentle demeanor. Friends said Kendrick rarely got into arguments. He smiled often and stayed out of trouble. His family was close-knit and deeply involved in his life. His parents, Kenneth and Jackie Johnson, encouraged their son's dreams, supported his athletic goals, and raised him with a strong sense of discipline and respect. So when Kendrick didn't return home on January 10th, it immediately raised alarm. His mother, Jackie, began calling his phone repeatedly. No answer. Hours passed. Panic set in. The following morning, Kendrick was reported missing. His last known location, he had been seen heading toward the school gym, a secondary one that wasn't used as much anymore, around his usual PE period. And then, it seemed, he had simply vanished. That same morning, students in the old gym began to notice something strange, a smell, something foul, heavy, and unmistakable. It was coming from the far corner of the gym, where several large rolled-up wrestling mats stood upright against the wall. One of the mats was around 6 feet tall and 3 feet wide. No one paid them much attention until a student climbed on top of one and looked down. Inside the mat, feet up and head down, was the body of Kendrick Johnson. It was a sight that no teenager should ever witness. Emergency services were called. Police arrived. Students were quickly ushered out of the gym, and the Johnson family was notified. By the time Kendrick's parents arrived at the school, the scene was chaotic. Yellow police tape fluttered at the gym's entrance. Officers, administrators, and onlookers stood solemnly. Kendrick's body was still inside the mat, waiting for removal by the medical examiner. Jackie Johnson, overwhelmed with grief, collapsed to the ground when she learned the news. From that moment, the case took a path that would only grow more confusing, controversial, and disturbing. The first autopsy, conducted by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI, ruled Kendrick's death accidental. According to the report, Kendrick had likely dropped one of his shoes into the vertical mat and, unable to reach it, attempted to climb in head first. He became stuck and, trapped in an inverted position, died from positional asphyxia. Essentially, the blood had rushed to his head over time, causing him to suffocate. The theory was chilling, but something about it didn't sit right with Kendrick's family. Nor did it with many members of the Valdosta community. For starters, Kendrick was nearly 6 feet tall and weighed around 160 pounds. How could someone of that size willingly climb headfirst into such a tight vertical space? The mat's opening was only 14 inches wide. Moreover, if he had truly become stuck, wouldn't he have called for help? Wouldn't someone nearby have heard him? Then came the photos. Kendrick's parents, in an act both brave and shocking, released images of their son's body as it appeared after it was found. These were not the photos you would expect from an accidental death. Kendrick's face was swollen, unrecognizable, and darkened. Blood was visible. His dreadlocks appeared cut. His family believed no, insisted that someone had hurt their son, that he had been murdered, and that the truth was being hidden. They didn't trust the investigation. They claimed the school had moved too quickly to label the death an accident. That evidence had been ignored, and they pointed to something else that was truly strange. The shoe Kendrick had supposedly been reaching for was found in the mat with his body, but it had no blood on it, despite his injuries. A second shoe, covered in what appeared to be blood, lay near a pool of blood nearby, outside the mat. If Kendrick had fallen in and bled, why would there be blood outside the mat? And then, just as suspicious, was the school's surveillance footage. Lowndes High School had over 30 cameras installed throughout its hallways and gym areas. Investigators pulled the footage from January 10th, hoping to track Kendrick's final movements. But what they found, or rather didn't find, only deepened the mystery. 4 cameras in and around the gym captured Kendrick at various times during the day, but there were gaps, moments missing. Some footage appeared to have been overwritten or corrupted. In total, around 4 hours of footage were inexplicably gone. The cameras also seemed to have different time stamps that didn't sync up, making it nearly impossible to create an accurate timeline. The official explanation: the cameras were motion activated and had occasional recording issues. But to Kendrick's family, this was more than a technical glitch. They saw it as a cover-up. Their suspicion turned to individuals at the school, especially 2 brothers, Brian and Brandon Bell, who had allegedly had past altercations with Kendrick. Brandon was a classmate, while Brian was a graduate and the son of an FBI agent. Rumors swirled that the boys may have had something to do with Kendrick's death. Some students whispered of fights in the past. Others mentioned tension between the families, but no hard evidence was ever produced to link either brother to the crime. In fact, despite growing pressure and national attention, no one was ever charged. But the Johnsons refused to stop. They hired their own independent pathologist, Dr. William Anderson, to conduct a second autopsy. And what he found shocked everyone. Kendrick had suffered blunt force trauma to the right side of his neck, an injury that could have killed him. There was no mention of positional asphyxia in this report. Then came an even more disturbing revelation. During the second autopsy, Kendrick's internal organs were missing. In their place, newspaper, his brain, heart, lungs, gone. The funeral home said they had received the body in that condition from the coroner. The coroner's office claimed the organs had liquefied during transport. But to Kendrick's parents, it was another grotesque sign of mishandling, of disrespect, and perhaps of a deeper plot. The Johnsons filed multiple lawsuits. They protested outside the courthouse. They marched with signs. They spoke to the media. Their grief was turned into action, but the answers remained elusive. Years passed. In 2016, the U.S. Department of Justice announced it would not pursue federal charges in the case, citing insufficient evidence of foul play. The decision devastated the Johnson family. Still, they did not stop fighting. And then, almost a decade later, in 2021, the case was officially reopened by the Lowndes County Sheriff's Office. New evidence had surfaced, they said. A 17-page confession letter had been sent to authorities. Was this the break the Johnsons had been waiting for? The reopened investigation in 2021 gave a sliver of hope to the Johnson family, a glimmer that after nearly a decade of grief and unanswered questions, someone might finally be held accountable for Kendrick's death. But as the case unfolded once again in the public eye, so did the confusion, and so did the controversies. The lines between truth, rumor, and speculation began to blur further, drawing national attention back to Valdosta, Georgia. To fully grasp how the case reignited, we have to return to the evidence, or lack thereof. From the beginning, law enforcement maintained that Kendrick's death was an accident, that he had simply tried to retrieve a pair of shoes he shared with a friend, which were routinely stored beneath or inside the rolled-up wrestling mats, that perhaps, due to the narrow width of the mat, Kendrick had no way to free himself once inside. But it was this exact scenario that many found hard to believe. Kendrick's parents asked the obvious: why wouldn't he just tip the mat over? Why crawl headfirst into something so narrow? Other students were asked if this was a regular habit, to store personal belongings inside the mats, and while a few agreed, none could explain why Kendrick, a fit, capable young man, would make such a reckless attempt. And the more his family pressed, the more inconsistencies surfaced. There was the matter of the missing surveillance footage, roughly 4 hours missing from the gym area. When questioned, the school district and camera company claimed there were no signs of tampering. The footage, they said, was corrupted or missing due to natural error. But this explanation did little to ease suspicion. In the few existing clips that were preserved, Kendrick is seen entering the gym, but never leaving. And then there was the shoe, the one he supposedly fell in to retrieve. It was clean, pristine even, not a drop of blood. But Kendrick's face had been badly swollen. His body was bloodied. If he bled inside the mat, why wasn't the shoe stained? Why were blood traces found outside the mat but not inside? This was more than a family in mourning. This was a pattern that pointed toward a cover-up, or at least gross negligence. Determined to prove their son had been murdered, Kendrick's family began filing lawsuits and gathering their own evidence. One of the most controversial moves came with the second autopsy they commissioned from Dr. William Anderson, a pathologist based in Florida. Unlike the original autopsy, performed by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, Dr. Anderson concluded that Kendrick had suffered blunt force trauma to the neck. That single finding changed everything. Suddenly, Kendrick's death wasn't just suspicious, it was potentially criminal. The Johnsons became increasingly vocal, not just about their son's death, but about who they believed was responsible. Their focus turned to two former classmates, Brian and Brandon Bell. Brandon, a student at the school, was reportedly involved in past altercations with Kendrick. Brian, his older brother, had already graduated, but both were the sons of an FBI agent. The Johnson family believed the brothers attacked Kendrick in the gym that day, perhaps over an old grudge. They believed Kendrick was murdered, and that their father, using his position and influence, helped orchestrate a cover-up. It was a bold accusation, and one that would eventually trigger a $100 million defamation lawsuit. Despite the seriousness of the claims, law enforcement never charged either Bell brother. No physical evidence connected them to Kendrick's death. They were never formally named as suspects. But public opinion began to polarize. The case had become more than a tragedy. It was now a national conversation about race, power, justice, and the way small-town systems can either serve or betray their communities. In 2016, after years of legal back and forth, the Department of Justice officially declined to bring federal charges in the case. The evidence, they said, simply did not meet the legal threshold. Investigators had spent over 2 years reviewing 100,000 emails, conducting over 100 interviews, and examining countless hours of footage and data. The conclusion: while the death was tragic, it could not be proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Kendrick had been murdered. For many, that was the end of the story. But for Kendrick's parents, it was only another chapter in a fight they refused to lose. In March of 2021, Lowndes County Sheriff Ashley Polk reopened the case, citing a newly obtained confession letter. According to Polk, someone had sent in a 17-page document detailing what they claimed happened to Kendrick. The contents of the letter were not immediately released to the public, but its existence breathed new life into the investigation. Sheriff Polk, who had originally served as sheriff years earlier and returned to office, pledged that he would leave no stone unturned. He retrieved over 17 boxes of evidence from the federal investigation. That included forensic files, interview transcripts, and all video surveillance that had previously been withheld. Polk made a promise to the Johnson family and the public this time: the review would be thorough and unbiased. But not everyone was convinced. Some critics pointed out that the confession may have been a hoax. Others questioned whether Polk, a white sheriff in a racially divided town, would truly bring impartial justice. And there was yet another complication: many of the original investigators, officers and staff had retired or moved on. Time had passed. Witnesses had moved away. Memories had faded. Still, Kendrick's name returned to headlines. Protests were reignited. His face, young, vibrant and full of promise, appeared once more on signs, in rallies, and across social media. It wasn't just about Kendrick anymore. It was about accountability, about who gets to determine a narrative when the dead can't speak, and about the haunting question: if Kendrick Johnson was murdered, how had the truth been buried for so long? The final blow to hopes of a breakthrough came quietly in January 2022. After reviewing all the files, the surveillance, the letter, and conducting over 100 interviews, Sheriff Polk announced that no new charges would be filed. The confession letter, unreliable. The injuries, consistent, he said, with a fall. Once again, the official conclusion was that Kendrick Johnson's death was a tragic accident. The Johnson family rejected that conclusion vehemently. They accused Polk of ignoring critical evidence, of downplaying inconsistencies, and of giving too much weight to flawed reports. Jackie Johnson stood in front of news cameras and declared that the system had failed her son. "We know Kendrick was murdered," she said, "and we will never stop saying it." Despite 3 autopsies, multiple investigations, and national attention, the question remains open, at least in the minds of many: what really happened in that school gym? Because while there is no smoking gun, There are 1,000 tiny inconsistencies, surveillance gaps, clean shoes beside bloody walls, conflicting autopsies, a pattern of silence, a swirl of rumors, and at the heart of it all, a 17-year-old boy who went to school one morning and never came home. His name was Kendrick Johnson, and the world still doesn't know how, or why, he died. By the time Kendrick Johnson's case was officially closed again in 2022, it had become far more than a local tragedy in Valdosta, Georgia. It was a national mystery, a quiet lightning rod for conversations about race, authority, and truth in the modern American justice system. And perhaps most importantly, it had become a symbol of how a family's determination to seek justice can keep a case alive, even when the system tries to declare it over. But despite the multiple investigations, autopsies, and news reports, there remains one very human question that continues to haunt both supporters and skeptics. What really happened to Kendrick that day? To try to answer that, you have to return to the moments before the discovery in the gym, before the blood-stained wall, the rolled-up mat, and the first responder photos that no one can forget. What was Kendrick Johnson's life really like? Those who knew him described him as a quiet, athletic teen. He played football and basketball. He smiled often, but spoke softly. His teachers remembered him as respectful. His classmates said he kept to himself but had friends. He was just 17, right at that tipping point between childhood and adulthood. His parents say he wanted to go to college and dreamed of becoming a professional athlete. He had no known enemies. He had no record, no drama, just a regular kid navigating high school life. But the Johnsons say there was one long-standing tension, an altercation from the past involving another student, Brandon Bell. According to the family, and some of Kendrick's friends, there had been a dispute between the two in the months or even years before Kendrick's death. Details are scarce. Some say it was a scuffle, others that it was more serious. But for the Johnsons, that history mattered. They believed that the Bell brothers, Brandon and his older brother Brian, were involved in Kendrick's death, that the incident in the gym wasn't a freak accident, but a planned assault. This theory gained traction online as amateur sleuths began combing through every detail of the case. The missing footage, the anomalies in Kendrick's autopsy photos, the alleged inconsistencies in student witness statements. Some pointed out that the Bell brothers were never thoroughly investigated. Others claimed they had alibis that weren't airtight. At the center of the theory was this belief that Kendrick went into that gym and either encountered or was lured into a confrontation, and that things spiraled from there. But law enforcement never found direct evidence to support that version of events. No DNA, no eyewitness, no fingerprints, just the eerie silence of the gym that morning, and the surveillance gaps that swallowed the truth. And so the narrative forked. In one version, Kendrick died in a tragic accident, one rooted in misjudgment, timing, and terrible luck. In the other, he was murdered, and the truth was buried under layers of influence, fear, and institutional failure. One of the most painful revelations for the Johnson family came in 2013, when they had their son's body exhumed for a second autopsy. What they discovered was beyond disturbing. According to the private pathologist they hired, Kendrick's internal organs were missing and had been replaced with newspaper. That fact made headlines, sparking outrage and speculation across the country. Who would remove a boy's organs? Why replace them with something so grotesque? The Georgia Bureau of Investigation, which performed the original autopsy, stated that Kendrick's organs were removed during the standard procedure and then disposed of due to natural decomposition. They insisted there was no foul play involved in the disposal. The funeral home responsible for Kendrick's burial claimed the body was delivered to them already without organs, and that newspaper had been used to fill the cavity. Again, they said, a common practice when organs are not available. But for many, this explanation didn't sit right. The optics were too grisly, the symbolism too loaded. To the Johnsons, it felt like yet another way the truth was being hidden, literally gutted and stuffed. It became a rallying point, a visceral, unforgettable image in a case already steeped in suspicion. One that asked, not just how Kendrick died, but what was done to him afterward. In the years following the reclosure of the case, the Johnson family never wavered. They marched, they spoke out, They held events in Kendrick's memory. Jackie and Kenneth Johnson became fixtures in the fight for justice, not just for their son, but for every family who felt the weight of a system stacked against them. They weren't just grieving parents anymore. They were activists, but activism came at a cost. The defamation lawsuits filed by the Bell family, and others painted the Johnsons as accusers without proof. In some circles, they were praised as warriors for truth. In others, they were accused of stoking division. The emotional toll, the legal fees, the endless cycle of hope and disappointment, none of it stopped them, but it did wear them down. And still, the questions kept circling. Why did Kendrick have injuries that some doctors called blunt force trauma, while others insisted were post-mortem changes? Why was the blood pattern around the mat inconsistent with a fall? Why was Kendrick's face so severely swollen? And most of all, why was there no clear, consistent explanation of his final moments? People who defend the accident theory say this: it was a freak tragedy, a confluence of odd circumstances, a boy rushing to retrieve a shoe, not realizing he wouldn't be able to climb out of the vertical mat, a delay in discovery, natural decomposition, a clean shoe because it was on top of the mat, not beneath him. They point to the exhaustive federal investigation, the lack of credible suspects, the absence of signs of a struggle. To them it's a heartbreaking accident, not a crime. But to the Johnson family, and many who have followed the case, those explanations aren't enough. They argue that even if Kendrick wasn't murdered, the case was mishandled from the start, that crucial hours were lost, that evidence was destroyed or overlooked, that racial bias played a role, that if Kendrick had been white, the story would have unfolded differently. And here is where the Kendrick Johnson case becomes something even deeper than a mystery. It becomes a mirror, a reflection of how America handles death, how race, class and power intersect when tragedy strikes, how some voices are amplified, while others go unheard, how families are left to become their own investigators, their own lawyers, their own storytellers. It also becomes a cautionary tale about the internet age, where theories can spread like wildfire, and where truth is sometimes hard to find beneath the noise. The Johnsons' fight continues to this day. They've called for further reviews, new legislation, and national awareness. Their goal has never changed. They want someone to be held accountable, and maybe most of all, they want peace, for Kendrick, for themselves, for a town still divided by a case that never quite went cold. Because no matter what you believe, accident or murder, cover-up or tragic mishap, one fact remains: Kendrick Johnson was a child. He went to school on January 10, 2013, and he never came home. The gym is quiet now. There are no flashing lights, no sirens, no coroner's vans or crime scene tape. Just the faint scent of floor wax and the hollow echo of sneakers in the distance. Time has rolled on at Lowndes High School, as it does everywhere. Students have graduated, teachers have retired, and yet in a quiet corner of that building, a space once occupied by a rolled-up wrestling mat still lingers in the imagination, etched with a question that has never been fully answered. What really happened to Kendrick Johnson? In the final part of this haunting story, we come face to face with what's left, the grief, the legacy, and the questions still echoing across time, from a quiet Georgia town to a nation watching from afar. When the second federal investigation into Kendrick's death was reopened in 2019, 6 years after the first had ended, it felt for a moment like a spark of hope. The Lowndes County Sheriff's Office announced it was re-examining more than 17 boxes of evidence, video files, witness interviews, physical exhibits. All of it once closed was now being looked at again. It was a rare and bittersweet development for the Johnson family. After years of rejection and silence, after vigils and protests and tireless public pleas, someone was finally listening again. For many it felt like a chance to correct what they saw as a terrible mistake. The new investigation was not led by the Department of Justice or outside authorities, but by the same local office that had once ruled Kendrick's death an accident. Still, there was cautious optimism. Maybe something had been missed, maybe someone would finally speak. And for over 2 years, that review carried on behind closed doors, slowly, quietly. Then in early 2022, the announcement came.
There would be no charges, no new suspects, no changes to the original ruling. According to Sheriff Ashley Polk, after reviewing all the evidence again, the office still concluded Kendrick's death had been a tragic accident. He also released 16 tapes from the school's surveillance system, offering a detailed explanation of what they believed had happened. But those conclusions didn't satisfy everyone. The tapes, critics pointed out, still had missing frames. Some showed Kendrick walking into the gym, but none ever showed him falling into the mat. Others questioned the medical conclusions. Why did the original autopsy suggest positional asphyxia, while a second one said blunt force trauma? Why had the body been exhumed not once, but twice? Even the FBI's forensic video analysis of the school footage seemed to raise more questions than it answered. The positioning of students, the movement of teachers, the timeline of who entered and exited the gym that day. It was all just ambiguous enough to keep the conspiracy theories alive, and just inconclusive enough to leave investigators certain there was no criminal evidence. It was the ultimate deadlock. In a case where nearly everyone agreed something awful had happened, no one could agree on exactly what or why. The Johnson family, unsurprisingly, rejected the findings once again. In their eyes, the 2022 closure was simply another example of the system protecting itself, another layer of silence over a story already filled with missing time and missing answers. But by now, Kendrick's story had become much more than a local case. His name had appeared alongside those of other young black Americans, whose deaths sparked outrage and national attention: Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. And while Kendrick's case was different, more mysterious than overtly violent, it became a symbol of something larger: how difficult it can be to get justice when the narrative doesn't fit neatly into the system's boxes. For a time, murals of Kendrick's face appeared on city walls. Marches in his honor took place in Valdosta and beyond. In classrooms and courtrooms, his name was spoken alongside discussions about forensic evidence, racial bias, and how trust in law enforcement is earned or lost. It also raised uncomfortable questions about how we handle death in public spaces, about who controls the narrative when a body is found, about how quickly an incident becomes an official conclusion, and about how a grieving family can become investigators, activists, even political figures, because no one else will do it for them. But beyond all the theories and legal filings, beyond the internet forums and protest signs, lies a very different story, a quieter one, a more painful one. It's the story of what happens to a family after the news cameras go away. Jackie and Kenneth Johnson have lived every parent's worst nightmare twice over. Not just the loss of a child, but the slow grinding disbelief that came with how that loss was treated. They've fought in courtrooms, they've spoken at rallies, they've stood outside government buildings with Kendrick's face printed on signs, asking over and over why. And yet they've also had to live normal lives, go to work, pay bills, sit through birthdays without Kendrick there to blow out candles, watch classmates he once knew go to college, get married, grow old. Time has marched forward, but grief doesn't follow the same calendar. Even now, Jackie sometimes speaks to reporters, sometimes to churches, sometimes to young activists who ask how they can help, and she always says the same thing: that she just wants to know what happened, that she wants justice, that she wants her son's life to mean something. Kenneth, quiet and reserved, often stands beside her at events, less vocal, but no less determined. Together they are a portrait of parental love fused with stubborn endurance. What they've lost is incalculable, and what they've carried is immeasurable. As the years pass, the Kendrick Johnson case has slowly become one of those stories that lives in the corners of our collective memory. The kind of mystery that floats back into the news now and then, re-examined by a podcast, a documentary, a Reddit post. It never fully disappears, but it never fully resolves either. It lingers, maybe because deep down, many of us fear the idea of dying alone and being misunderstood. Maybe because there's something so jarring about a bright young life ending in such a strange, sterile place, a school gym, surrounded by echoing silence and towering mats. Or maybe because it challenges our trust in the systems we're told to rely on. When they say the case is closed, we're supposed to believe them. When they say it was an accident, we're supposed to move on. But what happens when something inside you whispers, that doesn't feel right? In the end, the Kendrick Johnson case remains many things. It is a mystery, it is a tragedy, it is a story of two parents who refuse to let their son be forgotten. And it is a reminder that even in a world full of answers, some questions refuse to die. The gym is quiet now, but the echoes are still there.
The silent room. The death of Ellen Greenberg. The apartment was silent, the kind of silence that felt thick enough to choke on. No sounds of traffic from the busy streets below, no music playing, no voices arguing or laughing, just a quiet stillness that settled heavy in the air. Inside that stillness, the lifeless body of Ellen Greenberg lay on the floor of her Philadelphia apartment, 27 years old, a gifted schoolteacher with a promising future. But on this cold March day in 2011, Ellen was gone, and the circumstances of her death were already beginning to whisper secrets no one was ready to hear. Her landlord had found her, alone behind the locked door. She was covered in blood, the victim of a staggering number of stab wounds, most of them to the front of her body, but some to the back, including a deep cut that severed a major artery. The kitchen knife used was still at the scene. The initial report stunned everyone. How could a young woman, healthy and vibrant, have inflicted such brutal injuries on herself? The scene seemed impossible, yet the medical examiner's office ruled it a suicide. That conclusion immediately raised eyebrows. How could someone stab themselves repeatedly, 20 times? How could wounds to the back be self-inflicted? And what about the fact that the door to her apartment was locked from the inside, with no signs of forced entry? Ellen's parents refused to accept the ruling. To them, the idea that she had taken her own life was simply not plausible. She had been struggling with some mental health issues, yes, but she had no history of suicidal thoughts. Friends described her as kind and caring, full of life and ambition. Still, the case was officially closed, but their questions would not be silenced. As her parents began to dig deeper, they uncovered a web of contradictions and unanswered questions. They learned about inconsistencies in the autopsy report, unexplained injuries, and the strange way evidence was handled or mishandled. For starters, there was the issue of the stab wounds. Some were so deep and angled in ways that experts later said would be nearly impossible to self-inflict. Yet the medical examiner insisted it was a suicide. Then there was the locked door. It was secured from the inside, the key still in the lock. If no one else had entered, how did she end up dead with those wounds? Neighbors reported hearing nothing unusual that night. No screams, no sounds of a struggle. Some even recalled seeing Ellen happy and healthy just days before. The investigation seemed to stall. Police took the official ruling at face value, and the case faded from the public eye. But for Ellen's family, the case was far from over. Her parents hired independent experts to re-examine the evidence. They pushed for a new investigation, and slowly, a narrative began to emerge that was very different from the official story. One expert noted the lack of defensive wounds on Ellen's arms and hands, a sign that someone attacked her from behind. Another questioned the absence of fingerprints on the murder weapon. How could a person who stabbed themselves 20 times leave no fingerprints on the knife? Then there were the toxicology reports. Some showed traces of drugs that could have impaired her, but the levels were inconsistent. Some pointed to substances that weren't present in her system at all. All these anomalies added fuel to the suspicion that Ellen's death was not what it seemed. But without concrete evidence, the case remained in limbo. What had really happened in that quiet apartment? Had Ellen been attacked by someone she knew? Was there a cover-up? Or was it something even more disturbing? A tragic accident hidden beneath layers of confusion. The deeper her family dug, the more they encountered walls of silence. They were met with closed doors at the police department, unreturned calls, and a medical examiner's office, unwilling to revisit the case. The official stance remained unchanged: suicide. But for Ellen's parents, every unanswered question was a call to keep fighting. They wanted the world to know their daughter as she truly was, full of hope, life and dreams, not a victim of her own despair. And so the story of Ellen Greenberg's death became more than just a case file. It became a haunting mystery about truth, justice, and the shadows that linger when the official story doesn't add up. The silent room where she died still holds its secrets, and her family still waits for answers. The months following Ellen's death became a relentless battle for her family, a fight to peel back layers of official narrative and uncover the truth buried beneath. They were up against more than just grief. They were up against a system reluctant to admit it might have been wrong. The first thorn in their path was the autopsy report itself. It was supposed to be the definitive document, the medical examiner's word on how Ellen died. But as independent forensic experts later reviewed the case, serious concerns emerged about the thoroughness and accuracy of the original findings. One glaring issue was the nature of the stab wounds. The medical examiner had described the wounds as self-inflicted, pointing to hesitation marks on Ellen's arms, shallow cuts that can sometimes indicate a person struggling with a suicide attempt. But these wounds told only part of the story. The deeper wounds, especially those on her back, complicated that picture. How could Ellen stab herself in the back? According to forensic specialists brought in by the family, these wounds suggested she was attacked from behind or forced into a vulnerable position. It was almost impossible for a person to inflict such injuries on themselves without assistance or coercion. Even the knife used to kill Ellen raised questions. It was a standard kitchen knife, found near her body, but it lacked Ellen's fingerprints. Experts said that if someone wielded a knife to stab themselves multiple times, especially in moments of panic or pain, their fingerprints should be all over the handle. But in this case, nothing. Her parents found this impossible to reconcile with the official suicide ruling. And then there was the scene itself. Ellen's apartment was a modest one-bedroom unit in a historic building. The front door was locked from the inside, with the key still in the lock, a strong indication that no one had entered or left the apartment around the time of her death. Neighbors reported no unusual noises, no screams, no signs of struggle. Some remembered Ellen coming and going as usual just days before, cheerful and calm. The building's security cameras showed no suspicious visitors around the time of the incident. So how did she die? And why was the door locked tight? If Ellen had been attacked, was it by someone she let inside willingly? Or did the attacker somehow lock the door behind them? Or, as her family wondered, had someone staged the entire scene to look like a suicide? These questions gnawed at the edges of the investigation. Adding to the mystery were inconsistencies in the police handling of the case. Evidence was not collected as rigorously as it should have been. Some items were lost or destroyed. Key witnesses were not interviewed properly. Important reports disappeared. Ellen's family felt frustration turning to suspicion. Their relentless advocacy caught the attention of investigative journalists, who began to shine a spotlight on the case. Public pressure grew. In 2015, the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office reopened the case for review, prompted by new evidence and expert opinions. But even the new review failed to overturn the initial ruling. For the family, it was a devastating blow. The official stance remained that Ellen's death was a suicide, despite the mounting evidence to the contrary. What made the situation even more surreal was the lack of any clear motive. Ellen had been facing personal struggles. She was reportedly battling anxiety and depression, and had briefly checked into a mental health facility months before her death. But according to friends and family, she was getting better, with plans for the future, including moving to a new job and starting a family. There were no suicide notes, no messages of despair, no obvious triggers, and that brought a chilling question. If Ellen didn't kill herself, then who did? Some speculated about a possible intruder, others suggested a jealous partner or acquaintance. Yet no one was ever charged, and no suspects were named. The silence was deafening. The locked room nature of the crime scene felt like a puzzle designed to confuse. The police department's apparent unwillingness to push harder only deepened the mystery. Her parents turned to the public, hoping for anyone with information to come forward.
They held vigils, spoke to the media, and even raised funds for independent investigations. They painted a portrait of Ellen that contrasted sharply with the cold, clinical file the authorities maintained. She was an artist, a lover of life, passionate about teaching. She was someone who cared deeply about others, and she deserved justice. Meanwhile, conspiracy theories began to circulate online. Some suggested foul play involving powerful individuals who wanted to silence Ellen. Others whispered about a possible connection to a wider criminal network. While some theories stretched credibility, the common thread was clear. Ellen's death was not straightforward. Over time, the story of Ellen Greenberg morphed from a tragic loss into a symbol of systemic failure, a cautionary tale about how easily voices can be silenced when the truth is inconvenient. Her case became a haunting example of what happens when the unanswered questions outweigh the answers, and so the mystery of the silent room remained. Even years later, the locked door, the inexplicable wounds, and the missing fingerprints continue to puzzle experts. Ellen's family keeps fighting, because they know the truth is out there, and they won't stop until it's found. The fight for truth led Ellen's family down a maze of legal battles, scientific challenges, and heartbreaking dead ends. Each step forward seemed met with resistance, not just from institutions, but from the very nature of the case itself. As time passed, it became clear that reopening the investigation wasn't just a matter of uncovering facts. It was about confronting deeply entrenched assumptions and biases within the criminal justice system and medical examiner's office. One of the most perplexing aspects was the role of the Philadelphia Police Department. Initially, they had accepted the suicide ruling without fully exploring alternative scenarios. When the family pushed for a more thorough inquiry, the department's response was slow and at times dismissive. There were reports that critical evidence had been lost or mishandled. The knife that caused Ellen's death was one such example. Its chain of custody was called into question. Photographs of the crime scene, originally taken on film, seemed incomplete or were missing key angles. The forensics lab was criticized for incomplete analysis and delayed results. Some former investigators suggested the case was mishandled due to a lack of resources or personnel. Others hinted at deeper problems, an unwillingness to admit mistakes or confront uncomfortable truths. Meanwhile, Ellen's parents pursued their own investigation. They hired private forensic experts, including pathologists and crime scene analysts, to review the available evidence. These experts questioned almost every element of the original findings. One forensic pathologist noted that the stab wounds' angles and depth were inconsistent with suicide. Another specialist focused on the lack of defensive wounds, which suggested Ellen hadn't fought back, something unusual if she had been attacking herself. Further, toxicology reports presented conflicting data. Some samples showed traces of prescription medications that could impair judgment, but others did not. It was unclear whether these inconsistencies were due to contamination, clerical errors, or deliberate tampering. Perhaps most chilling was the evidence that the crime scene itself might have been staged. The neat arrangement of blood spatter, and the absence of signs of struggle, contradicted what one would expect in a violent stabbing. What if the killer had carefully arranged the scene to mimic suicide? The more questions piled up, the more difficult the search for truth became. Media coverage helped bring attention to the case, but it also brought complications. Tabloid speculation and conspiracy theories sometimes overshadowed the hard facts. Some reporters sensationalized the tragedy, while others questioned the family's motives, portraying them as unable to accept reality. Despite this, Ellen's family remained steadfast. They worked tirelessly to keep the case alive, reaching out to advocacy groups focused on wrongful death and medical examiner reform. They lobbied for changes in how forensic evidence is handled, and pushed for accountability in the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's office. Their activism inspired others who felt failed by the system to speak out. One particularly heartbreaking moment came when a private investigator, uncovered surveillance footage from a nearby building showing a shadowy figure near Ellen's apartment the night she died. The footage was grainy and unclear, but it suggested someone entered or exited the building at a time when no one was supposed to be there. Unfortunately, police did not follow up on the lead. The tape was never officially released, and its existence was only confirmed years later. Ellen's family was devastated. It was a tantalizing clue that could have changed everything, if only it had been acted upon. As the years dragged on, their fight took an emotional toll. The pain of losing Ellen was compounded by frustration, isolation, and the constant battle against bureaucracy. Yet they never gave up hope. They believed that someday, someone would look at the case with fresh eyes. Someone who would listen, who would see the contradictions, and who would seek justice. In the meantime, Ellen's story remains a haunting reminder of what happens when a young life ends under mysterious circumstances, and the truth is left locked behind a silent door. The search continues. Years after Ellen's death, her case continues to echo through the halls of justice, forensic science, and public consciousness. It is a story that refuses to settle into neat categories, too many loose ends, too many questions without answers. One of the most profound lessons from this case is how fragile the pursuit of truth can be, especially when it confronts entrenched systems and the limits of science. Ellen's family never stopped pushing for accountability. They organized fundraisers to support further investigations, partnered with legal experts to explore wrongful death claims, and advocated for reform in forensic practices, hoping to prevent other families from enduring similar heartbreak. Their efforts spurred some changes. The Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office began reviewing its protocols, implementing more rigorous standards for evidence collection and autopsy procedures. Public awareness about the importance of forensic transparency grew, but these victories felt small against the backdrop of their loss. In the years since Ellen's passing, advances in forensic technology, like DNA analysis and digital crime scene reconstruction, have opened new possibilities. Some experts believe that with fresh examination, more clues could surface. However, without access to the original physical evidence, many of these possibilities remain hypothetical. The locked room mystery of Ellen's death continues to captivate true crime enthusiasts, forensic scientists, and advocates alike. What happened inside that silent apartment? Was it suicide, as the official reports claim, or did Ellen fall victim to a sinister act hidden in plain sight? The stark facts don't easily resolve into answers. What remains certain is the human cost. A young woman, full of promise and creativity, lost in a violent and inexplicable way. A family shattered, forced to live with uncertainty, and fight against a system that seemed indifferent. The legacy of Ellen Greenberg is a cautionary tale about the dangers of assumptions, the need for thorough investigation, and the relentless pursuit of justice, even when the truth is elusive. Her story reminds us that every unexplained death deserves careful scrutiny, respect, and compassion, that behind every case file is a person who mattered. Ellen's silent room may never reveal all its secrets, but her family's voice will not be silenced, and the call for justice will echo on.
The case of Elisa Lam, 2013. Elisa Lam was a vibrant young woman full of life, hope, and the usual ambitions of a college student exploring the world. At 21 years old, she was studying at the University of British Columbia, taking a semester abroad in Los Angeles. It was early 2013 when she checked into the Cecil Hotel, a notorious downtown LA establishment with a dark history. The hotel had earned a reputation over the decades as a place where strange things happened, where travelers sometimes vanished or met grim fates. But Elisa's story would make the Cecil infamous on a global scale. When Elisa arrived, she had plans to explore the city, meet new people, and take advantage of her temporary home away from home. Those who knew her described her as quirky, artistic, and at times shy, but never someone who would willingly disappear without a trace. Yet, after checking in, something about her stay seemed off. Within days, reports emerged that Elisa was acting strangely. Hotel guests and staff said she was seen behaving oddly in the elevator, pressing multiple buttons, peering out as if afraid, sometimes talking to herself. Some described her as visibly distressed, others claimed she seemed lost, as though she was searching for something or someone who wasn't there. The last time Elisa was seen alive was captured by one of the hotel's surveillance cameras. The grainy black and white footage shows her entering the elevator alone. She presses several buttons repeatedly, steps in and out, looks around nervously, and waves her hands as if trying to communicate with someone. Her movements are jerky and erratic, almost as if she were responding to an unseen presence. Then, without explanation, she disappears from view when the elevator doors close. What happened next was a mystery that would grip the world. When Elisa failed to check out or respond to calls from worried family and friends, authorities were alerted. A search of the hotel began, with police canvassing rooms, interviewing guests, and reviewing security footage. But the footage of Elisa's last known moments only deepened the mystery. No one could explain her strange behavior, or how she vanished without a trace from a building filled with people and security cameras. As days passed, the pressure mounted. The hotel was under intense scrutiny, and the story dominated news headlines. The public was captivated by the eerie video, dissecting every frame for clues. Theories abounded. Was Elisa being chased? Did she have a mental health crisis? Was there someone else involved, or was something more sinister at play? 4 days after her disappearance, maintenance workers investigating complaints about low water pressure discovered Elisa's body floating inside one of the hotel's rooftop water tanks. The shock of this grim discovery rippled through the community. How had she ended up there? The water tanks were locked and difficult to access, high above the roof, requiring special tools and knowledge to open. Her death was ruled an accidental drowning by the coroner, with bipolar disorder listed as a contributing factor, but many found the official explanation unsatisfying. There were no signs of trauma, no evidence of foul play, or so the reports said. The fact that Elisa's body had gone undiscovered for days in a water tank where hundreds of guests got their drinking water raised unsettling questions about the hotel's maintenance and security. The Cecil Hotel itself had a shadowy history. Over the years, it was home to several tragic and violent incidents, including suicides, murders, and mysterious deaths. Some even called it a suicide hotel. This grim backdrop cast a dark pall over Elisa's case, leading many to wonder if something paranormal or cursed was at work. But experts focused on more grounded explanations. Some speculated that Elisa's bipolar disorder might have caused a psychotic episode, leading her to climb onto the roof and accidentally fall into the water tank. Others suggested that the hotel's lax security made it possible for her to wander unnoticed, but no one could explain how she had managed to open the locked tank lid. Friends and family painted a fuller picture of Elisa, sharing stories of her creativity, struggles with mental illness, and love for travel and adventure. They were haunted by the elevator footage, and desperate for answers that the police and coroner could not provide. Many felt that the investigation was incomplete, that critical questions remained unanswered. The case became a cultural phenomenon, inspiring documentaries, podcasts, and countless internet discussions. It sparked debates about mental health awareness, hotel safety standards, and the role of surveillance footage in solving or deepening mysteries. Elisa Lam's story was not just about a tragic death. It was about how a young woman's final days intersected with a place known for darkness and despair. It showed how society grapples with mental illness, how institutions handle mysterious deaths, and how public fascination can sometimes overshadow the real human tragedy beneath. In the years since, the Cecil Hotel changed ownership and was rebranded, but the ghost of Elisa's story remains. Her case stands as a haunting reminder of how life's mysteries can defy easy answers, how truth can slip through the cracks of official reports, and how some questions remain forever unanswered. After Elisa's body was found in the water tank, the public outcry grew louder. Questions flooded in from all directions. How could someone disappear inside a hotel and remain undiscovered for days? How did she get up to the roof unnoticed? And why had the hotel's security footage only captured her eerie elevator behavior, but nothing of her leaving the elevator or climbing to the roof. The Los Angeles Police Department launched a thorough investigation. Officers interviewed hotel staff, maintenance workers and guests. They searched the entire building looking for clues. The investigation sought to determine whether foul play was involved, or if Elisa's death was truly an accident or suicide. But the answers were frustratingly elusive. The hotel's rooftop was accessed by a set of locked doors, alarmed and secured to prevent unauthorized entry. Yet somehow, Elisa had made her way to the roof, and then into one of the water tanks, which themselves were locked with heavy lids requiring tools to open. Maintenance workers stated they had to use special equipment to remove the lids. How Elisa managed this alone remained a mystery. The coroner's report indicated no physical signs of struggle or trauma on Elisa's body. The cause of death was listed as accidental drowning, with bipolar disorder as a significant factor contributing to her behavior. Experts suggested she may have experienced a manic or psychotic episode, which sometimes includes hallucinations or disorganized thinking, possibly leading her to climb onto the roof. Her mental health history became a central focus. Elisa had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and had a history of depressive and manic episodes. Friends and family confirmed she was undergoing treatment, but struggled with medication adherence and mood swings. Some wondered if she had stopped taking her medication, which might have contributed to the erratic behavior seen in the elevator footage. Yet many who knew her doubted she would intentionally harm herself or wander into danger without seeking help. The last moments captured on camera suggested fear, confusion or even paranoia. Was she trying to escape something? Was someone else involved, or was her mind playing tricks on her? The elevator video became an obsession for armchair detectives and professionals alike. Analysts pored over every second of the footage. Some noted that Elisa appeared to be hiding or speaking to someone invisible. Others speculated she was having a seizure or suffered from a medical emergency. The video's unsettling, almost surreal quality added to the case's notoriety. Meanwhile, the hotel itself faced harsh scrutiny. The Cecil was infamous not only for its dark past, but for poor maintenance, lax security, and low budgets. Investigations revealed several issues: broken or malfunctioning elevators, inadequate security cameras, and gaps in monitoring systems. These flaws raised serious questions about how such a tragedy could occur under the hotel's watch. Legal experts debated liability. Could the hotel be held responsible for failing to secure the roof or maintain safety standards? Was there negligence in not noticing Elisa's disappearance sooner or conducting a thorough search earlier? As media coverage exploded, conspiracy theories flourished. Some claimed the hotel was haunted or cursed, linking Elisa's death to the many strange incidents in the building's history. Others suggested a cover-up, arguing the official explanations glossed over evidence of foul play. The internet became a forum for theories ranging from supernatural to criminal. Amid the chaos, Elisa's family and close friends struggled with grief and frustration. They wanted the world to remember her as more than a headline or viral video. She was an aspiring writer, a traveler with a passion for art, and someone who touched many lives. Their pleas for respect and privacy were often drowned out by sensationalism. In the months following the tragedy, several documentaries and podcasts aimed to tell Elisa's story with sensitivity and depth. They interviewed family members, mental health experts and investigators, trying to piece together the puzzle and honor Elisa's memory. Mental health advocates used the case to highlight the challenges faced by those with bipolar disorder and the importance of compassionate care and support. They stressed that Elisa's story was not just about mystery, but about real struggles millions endure. Investigators also revisited the hotel's security procedures, pushing for reforms to prevent future incidents. Some argued for mandatory rooftop alarms, improved water tank security, and better surveillance systems in hotels nationwide. Despite the official conclusions, some critical questions lingered. How did Elisa get from the elevator to the roof unnoticed? Did the hotel's cameras capture her movements elsewhere, but the footage was lost or withheld? Why did it take so long to find her body in the water tank? Could a witness have seen something but never came forward? The case also exposed limitations in forensic science.
Water can rapidly degrade evidence, making it difficult to determine timelines or confirm the presence of other individuals. In Elisa's case, the lack of physical evidence of foul play left investigators to rely heavily on circumstantial details and assumptions. In the years since, Elisa Lam's story has become a case study in how tragedy, mental illness, and institutional failure can intertwine. It remains a cautionary tale about the vulnerability of individuals in large urban settings, where anonymity and neglect can have deadly consequences. Through all this, one fact remains undeniable: Elisa Lam was a person whose life was cut short under mysterious and heartbreaking circumstances. Her case challenges us to look beyond the sensational and ask how we can do better for those struggling with mental health issues, for those vulnerable in society, and for the systems meant to protect them. As the investigation into Elisa Lam's death continued, the spotlight on the Cecil Hotel intensified. The once overlooked downtown Los Angeles building had become a symbol of mystery and tragedy, drawing tourists, paranormal enthusiasts, and true crime followers alike. Yet behind the public fascination, the hotel's dark history and structural issues added layers of complexity to the case. The Cecil Hotel had been operating since the 1920s and had long housed low-income residents, many struggling with addiction, mental illness, or homelessness. The building's reputation for violence and despair dated back decades, with numerous suicides, murders, and unexplained deaths reported over the years. Some locals even whispered about ghost stories and curses surrounding the place. When Elisa's death made international headlines, many people revisited those past incidents, drawing eerie parallels. It was as if the hotel itself were a character in a grim story, a place where tragedy seemed inevitable. Despite this, the hotel's management was under fire for what critics called a failure to maintain safety standards. Security footage had gaps and blind spots. The roof was accessible through unsecured doors. Water tanks were not properly locked. After Elisa's death, maintenance crews reportedly discovered more structural issues than previously known. The hotel's owners faced lawsuits from Elisa's family, claiming negligence contributed to her death. The case underscored systemic problems in managing aging properties in urban centers, especially those with vulnerable populations. The hotel eventually closed its doors for renovations, attempting to rebrand away from its sordid past, but the stigma lingered. Meanwhile, mental health professionals weighed in on Elisa's case, highlighting how bipolar disorder can impact judgment and perception. Psychotic episodes can lead to paranoia, hallucinations, and disorganized behavior, symptoms consistent with Elisa's elevator video. Friends revealed that Elisa had recently stopped taking her medications, a common occurrence in young adults navigating the challenges of mental illness. This could have triggered a severe episode, causing confusion and fear. However, some experts cautioned against assuming mental illness alone explained the tragedy, noting the lack of definitive evidence about her state of mind in those final hours. The elevator video continued to baffle experts and the public alike. Several interpretations emerged. Some psychologists suggested Elisa was experiencing a dissociative episode or panic attack, explaining her erratic movements. Others hypothesized she was attempting to communicate with unseen entities or escape an imagined threat. The footage's eerie quality, enhanced by poor lighting and the grainy black and white, gave it an almost supernatural aura. It became one of the most watched viral videos related to a true crime case, sparking thousands of online theories. Among the more grounded theories was the possibility that Elisa's behavior was the result of a medical condition such as epilepsy or a seizure disorder, which she had never been diagnosed with. Others wondered if drugs or alcohol played a role. Toxicology reports showed no illicit substances in her system, though some prescription medications were detected. Law enforcement insisted the case was closed as accidental drowning, but conspiracy theorists remained unconvinced. Some posited that hotel staff or guests had seen or done something they hid, while others alleged a cover-up to protect the hotel's reputation. Adding to the mystery was the lack of CCTV footage showing Elisa leaving the elevator or accessing the roof. If cameras had covered all entry points, she would have been caught on film. This gap in footage fueled suspicions that either the cameras were malfunctioning, or footage was deliberately withheld. In response, the police released portions of the hotel's surveillance videos, but redacted or excluded some clips, citing privacy and investigation integrity. This only stoked further rumors. Elisa's family pushed for transparency and justice. Her mother spoke publicly about the importance of mental health resources and called for improved safety standards in hotels. They mourned the loss of a bright, talented young woman and condemned the sensationalism surrounding her death. As time passed, the case entered the realm of modern folklore, referenced in TV shows, documentaries and true crime podcasts. It became a cultural touchstone for discussions about urban loneliness, mental health stigma, and the dark side of travel and tourism. The story's resonance was partly due to its intersection of real-world tragedy and eerie mystery, a reminder that some deaths defy simple explanations. The image of Elisa in the elevator, alone and vulnerable, became a haunting symbol of how a single moment can spiral into an enigma that captures global attention. In the years following, several other incidents at the Cecil Hotel kept the building in the public eye, but none as poignant as Elisa's case. The hotel was eventually sold and reopened under a new name, with upgraded security and maintenance. Despite changes, the legacy of Elisa Lam's death remains a cautionary tale. It highlights the need for better mental health care, especially for young adults far from home and support networks. It exposes the dangers of neglect in aging urban infrastructure and the consequences of institutional failures. Her story also underscores how society often struggles to reconcile mental illness with tragedy, frequently defaulting to stigma or sensationalism, rather than empathy and understanding. At its core, Elisa's case is a human story about a young woman caught between worlds, between health and illness, safety and danger, visibility and invisibility. It challenges us to look deeper into the lives behind headlines and viral videos, to seek truth without speculation, and to honor those lost with dignity. The final chapter of Elisa Lam's story is as much about the aftermath as it is about the mystery itself. After the discovery of her body and the public release of the eerie elevator footage, the world had many questions, most of which remain unanswered. What happened to Elisa on that roof? Why was she there alone, in such a vulnerable state? And how could someone vanish so completely inside a building under constant surveillance? In the days and weeks that followed, public attention turned to the broader issues surrounding Elisa's death. Her family and friends fought against the narrative that mental illness was the sole cause, emphasizing that she was a complex individual, full of life and promise, not just a label. Elisa's mother, Cecilia Lamb, became an outspoken advocate for mental health awareness, speaking about the importance of medication adherence, support systems and compassionate treatment. She described how Elisa had struggled, but also how she had moments of joy, hope, and strength. The loss was a tragedy that resonated far beyond their family. The hotel itself became a symbol of systemic failure. Questions were asked about how the rooftop water tanks could be accessed so easily, how security cameras failed to capture crucial moments, and how a guest could be released into an unsafe environment, issues that echoed other high-profile incidents in hospitality and urban housing. City officials and health advocates began pushing for reforms in hotel safety protocols, particularly for older buildings housing vulnerable populations. New regulations were introduced in Los Angeles, mandating better camera coverage, secured access to hazardous areas, and improved emergency response training for hotel staff. The story also shed light on how quickly digital culture consumes and morphs real tragedy. The elevator video became a viral sensation, inspiring memes, fan theories, and even artistic tributes. While some of this attention helped keep Elisa's memory alive, it also led to exploitation and insensitivity, an uncomfortable reminder of the internet's double-edged nature. True crime documentaries and podcasts explored the case in depth, presenting the facts, interviews, and various hypotheses. Some productions leaned into the paranormal or conspiratorial aspects, while others sought to humanize Elisa, emphasizing her struggles with bipolar disorder and the social factors that contributed to her isolation. Critics of the media coverage pointed out how Elisa's mental health was often portrayed sensationally, reinforcing stigma rather than fostering understanding. This sparked broader conversations about how society treats individuals with mental illness, especially when their deaths become public spectacles. Psychiatrists and sociologists used Elisa's case as a teaching example to highlight the complexities of bipolar disorder, the challenges of medication compliance, and the dangers of untreated mental health issues. They argued for better support systems, especially for young adults who may feel lost or overwhelmed. The police maintained that no evidence indicated foul play. The official cause of death remained accidental drowning, complicated by bipolar disorder. But to this day, many remain skeptical. The gaps in surveillance footage, the unclear timeline, and Elisa's bizarre behavior in the elevator keep the case shrouded in mystery. Some family members of other victims, who died at the Cecil Hotel, contacted Elisa's family, sharing their own stories of loss and frustration. The hotel's dark history seemed to weave a haunting narrative of vulnerability and tragedy within its walls. The hotel, rebranded as the Stay on Main, has since been renovated and upgraded, attempting to distance itself from the shadow cast by Elisa Lam's death and the many tragedies before her. But the memory of Elisa remains tied to that place, a chilling reminder of what can happen when mental illness, urban isolation, and institutional neglect collide. For many, Elisa's story serves as a cautionary tale about the fragility of life, the importance of compassion, and the need for systemic change. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about how society handles mental health, and how easily someone can become invisible even in the heart of a bustling city. In the end, Elisa Lam was more than just a viral video or a headline. She was a young woman with dreams and struggles, whose life ended too soon under tragic and mysterious circumstances. Her story challenges us to look beyond the surface, to seek truth and empathy, and to remember the humanity behind the mysteries we try to solve.
The story of the Green River Killer, Gary Ridgway. In the early 1980s, Seattle and the surrounding King County area were gripped by fear and confusion. Bodies of young women started appearing in the wilderness near the Green River, a slow-moving waterway cutting through Washington state. The killer left behind a trail of victims, each found in remote locations, many partially submerged or hidden beneath debris. This was the beginning of one of the longest and most harrowing serial killer investigations in American history. The first known victims were discovered in 1982. Over the next several years, the number of bodies found rose steadily, and a pattern emerged. Most victims were young, vulnerable women, many of whom were runaways, sex workers, or struggling with addiction. This tragic fact complicated the investigation. Their marginalized status meant they often went missing without immediate attention, and their cases were not always connected quickly. The media dubbed the perpetrator the Green River Killer, a name that would become infamous as the decades dragged on. Police were under immense pressure to catch the murderer, but the killer was elusive, methodical, and cruelly patient. At the time, forensic technology was limited. DNA analysis was in its infancy, and police relied heavily on eyewitness testimony, behavioral profiling, and physical evidence from crime scenes. Detectives painstakingly interviewed hundreds of suspects, ran down countless leads, and worked through mountains of evidence that often led to dead ends. The killings seemed random yet deliberate. Victims were strangled, their bodies dumped in areas that were sometimes difficult to access, indicating the killer's familiarity with the local terrain. Many of the women were killed away from their home cities, which further muddied the investigative waters. Over time, a suspect emerged, Gary Ridgway, a local truck painter. Quiet, unassuming, and seemingly normal, Ridgway was an unlikely candidate. He was married, had children, and appeared to live a typical suburban life. But beneath that facade was a man with dark, violent urges and a chilling ability to hide in plain sight. Ridgway came under police suspicion early in the investigation. He was questioned multiple times, but in those days, the evidence was circumstantial. He denied involvement, passed polygraph tests, and appeared cooperative. The police struggled to connect him directly to the crimes, and despite strong suspicions, he remained free for years. Meanwhile, the community remained terrified. Women were afraid to walk alone or accept rides from strangers. Parents warned their daughters, and the media sensationalized every new detail. Each discovery of another body intensified the collective fear, yet the killer remained at large. The investigation itself evolved. Police created one of the first serial killer task forces in the country, pooling resources and expertise. New techniques were developed to track patterns and connect seemingly unrelated crimes. The Green River Killer case became a landmark in forensic psychology and law enforcement collaboration. Despite these advances, the killer's identity stayed a mystery through the 1980s and well into the 1990s. The case grew cold at times, with no new leads and mounting frustration. But the victims were never forgotten. Their names, many of whom had been lost to addiction or poverty, were etched into the public consciousness as symbols of lost innocence and the price of being overlooked. The turning point came with advances in DNA technology. By the late 1990s, police began revisiting old evidence, testing it with new scientific methods. This led to a breakthrough that finally put Ridgway in the spotlight again. The DNA evidence from multiple victims matched Ridgway's genetic profile, and he was arrested in 2001. The arrest shocked the community. How could a man living an ordinary life have done something so horrific for so long? The question haunted investigators, journalists, and the public alike. In custody, Ridgway confessed to killing 71 women, though he claimed the number was higher. His confessions revealed chilling details of manipulation, violence, and depravity. He told how he picked victims, often lured them with promises or force, and strangled them in secluded spots. His cold, calculated methods allowed him to evade capture for nearly 2 decades. His trial was a media sensation. The courtroom was packed as families of victims sought closure. Ridgway was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, ending the reign of terror that had gripped the Pacific Northwest for so long. But even after his conviction, the case continued to resonate. It highlighted the challenges of policing marginalized communities, the power of forensic science, and the dark depths of human nature. Gary Ridgway's story remains one of the most chilling and studied serial killer cases in history, a grim reminder of evil lurking beneath the surface of everyday life. The years after the initial wave of killings saw law enforcement officials grappling with the enormity of the case and their inability to bring the perpetrator to justice. The Green River Killer was not just one man. In the minds of investigators, it seemed almost like a ghost, an invisible predator slipping through cracks no matter how tightly they tried to close them. Every time a new body surfaced near the river or in surrounding woods, it was a painful reminder that the killer was still out there, still hunting. Police officers involved in the case remember the growing dread of working the same patches of forest and riverbank repeatedly, hoping for clues that never fully materialized. Investigators scoured the area, looking for trace evidence, items that might link a suspect to a crime scene, or patterns that might narrow the search. But the killer's careful disposal of bodies and the rugged wilderness made this a near impossible task. During this time, a psychological profile began to take shape. Behavioral experts were called in to analyze the killer's modus operandi, the way the crimes were committed, to help narrow down suspects. The profile painted a disturbing picture. The killer was likely a white male in his late 20s to early 40s, familiar with the region's geography, possibly working in a job that allowed him freedom to travel at odd hours. The profile suggested he had a deep-seated hatred of women, mixed with a desire for control and domination. As the years wore on, investigators also began to realize how crucial community involvement would be. Tips from locals, sightings, and reports of suspicious activity became the lifeblood of the investigation. Many of the women targeted were sex workers or vulnerable teens, who sometimes lived on society's fringes. Their disappearances didn't always make headlines immediately, making it harder to connect cases or raise public awareness. The police urged families and communities to be vigilant. They also started outreach programs aimed at at-risk women, hoping to prevent further victims. But the killer's persistence challenged every effort. It was as if he enjoyed toying with law enforcement, stretching the investigation into a decades-long nightmare. Meanwhile, Gary Ridgway continued his double life. To neighbors and colleagues, he was quiet, polite, and unremarkable. He worked as a truck painter, a job that offered him mobility and a flexible schedule. Ridgway was a married man, with children, and a seemingly ordinary domestic life. Yet behind closed doors was a man capable of monstrous violence. His home life gave no obvious signs of his dark activities. Family members described him as reserved but not overtly hostile. They had no clue about the horrors lurking beneath his surface. This duality baffled those who knew him, and added to the chilling nature of his crimes, a killer hiding in plain sight. Throughout the 1990s, the investigation intensified, with a growing task force dedicated exclusively to tracking the Green River Killer. Advances in forensic science began to offer new hope. The advent of DNA profiling was a game changer. Old evidence, hair samples, fibers, and bodily fluids, was re-examined with techniques that were impossible just a decade earlier. Yet despite the breakthroughs, the killer remained elusive. Ridgway submitted to multiple DNA tests during police questioning, but was never formally arrested. Investigators struggled to build a case strong enough for charges, as Ridgway's alibis and denials created a complex puzzle. The frustration grew. Families of victims, police, and the public demanded answers. The press continued to report on the case, keeping the spotlight on the killer's trail and the growing list of victims. The Green River Killer became a grim household name, a symbol of a city haunted by unanswered questions. Then, in the late 1990s, a crucial break came from an unlikely source, a civilian tip. Someone familiar with Ridgway's behavior and movements contacted police, urging them to take another look. This tip rekindled the investigation with renewed vigor. With fresh leads, the task force started to close in. They used surveillance, forensic reanalysis, and targeted interviews to gather evidence. A search of Ridgway's home and workplaces was conducted, but at first they found nothing incriminating. The turning point arrived in 2001, when advances in DNA technology allowed investigators to definitively link Ridgway to multiple victims. DNA samples taken from the bodies matched Ridgway's genetic profile. This was the evidence needed to arrest him. Ridgway's arrest was a shocking moment. The man who had lived quietly in the community for years was finally exposed as the serial killer behind the Green River murders. The public struggled to reconcile the image of the mild-mannered family man with the horrifying reality of his crimes. Once in custody, Ridgway began to confess, initially hesitating, then more openly admitting to the murders. His confessions were detailed and disturbing. He spoke of his methods, the moments he selected victims, and the places where he disposed of their bodies. Ridgway's admissions helped bring closure to many families who had waited years for answers. The trial that followed was intense and heavily covered by the media. Ridgway pled guilty to 48 counts of murder, making it one of the largest serial killer cases in U.S. history. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Even after his sentencing, Ridgway continued to cooperate with authorities, leading them to more victims and additional evidence. The full scope of his crimes shocked investigators, revealing a dark chapter of human depravity that had stretched over 2 decades. The Green River Killer case not only highlighted the horrors committed by one man, but exposed systemic failures in how society viewed marginalized victims. It raised questions about the vulnerability of certain groups, the challenges of policing complex crimes, and the limits of forensic technology before recent advances. For years, the women who fell victim to Ridgway were forgotten, their lives erased in the shadows. But through painstaking police work and the perseverance of families and communities, their stories emerged from the darkness. The Green River Killer case remains a chilling example of evil hidden beneath everyday life, a reminder of how darkness can dwell within the most ordinary faces. As Gary Ridgway sat behind bars, the ripple effects of his crimes and subsequent confessions continued to spread throughout the Pacific Northwest and beyond. The sheer scale of the Green River murders, 48 victims confessed,
with suspicions that even more might never be found, left a lasting scar on communities and law enforcement alike. But the story didn't end with his arrest. In many ways, that was only the beginning of a new chapter of reckoning, healing and painful truth. Investigators returned again and again to the scenes where the bodies had been found. Each new victim identified brought a mix of relief and sorrow. Families who had lived with uncertainty, hoping against hope that their loved ones might still be alive, finally had answers, albeit heartbreaking ones. The discoveries also shed light on the killer's meticulous methods and patterns. Many victims had been strangled, some had been dumped in remote locations, others along the riverbank. The quiet forests and murky waters that had once concealed these crimes became grim markers of a decades-long nightmare. One of the most haunting aspects of the Green River Killer case was the reality of the victims themselves. Many were young women struggling with addiction, homelessness, or involvement in the sex trade. Society often overlooked them, making it easier for the killer to prey on those who lacked protection or support. This raised difficult questions about how law enforcement and communities could better serve vulnerable populations. The public outcry following Ridgway's arrest also sparked changes in police procedures and victim advocacy. New protocols for tracking missing persons were introduced, with an emphasis on treating all cases with urgency and respect regardless of background. Outreach programs sought to connect with at-risk individuals before tragedy could strike. The Green River case became a catalyst for reform, shining a harsh light on social failures. Despite these efforts, the trauma for families was overwhelming. Many had waited years, even decades, for closure. The pain of knowing their daughters, sisters or friends were victims of such brutal crimes left deep emotional wounds. Some families worked with counselors and support groups, while others found solace in public memorials created in honor of the missing and the lost. Ridgway's cooperation after his arrest helped unravel some mysteries, but also introduced new ethical dilemmas. Prosecutors agreed to reduce some charges and promised not to seek the death penalty in exchange for his full confession and assistance in locating victims. For some, this deal felt like justice served. For others, it seemed an inadequate response to monstrous evil. Throughout the trial, and afterwards, Ridgway's demeanor remained cold and calculated. He spoke frankly about his crimes, but showed little remorse. Experts debated whether he truly understood the pain he caused, or whether his confessions were simply tactical moves to avoid harsher punishment. This chilling detachment underscored the terrifying gap between ordinary human empathy and the mind of a serial killer. The psychological profile built during the investigation had been remarkably accurate in some ways, but couldn't fully explain the depths of Ridgway's pathology. He embodied contradictions, a family man capable of unspeakable violence, a man who could charm and blend into society while hiding horrific secrets. His case became a study in the complexity of human psychology and the masks people wear. One lasting legacy of the Green River Killer case is its influence on forensic science. The advances in DNA testing that helped bring Ridgway to justice have since been applied to countless other cold cases, helping to solve crimes that once seemed impossible to crack. The case demonstrated how crucial scientific innovation can be in the pursuit of truth. However, the case also serves as a warning about the limits of technology and the importance of human vigilance. The fact that Ridgway was able to kill for so long before being caught reveals weaknesses in communication, resources, and societal attitudes toward vulnerable individuals. In the years since Ridgway's conviction, memorials have been established to honor the victims. These spaces provide a place for mourning, remembrance, and reflection on the lives cut tragically short. The victims' names, once lost in obscurity, are now spoken aloud and remembered, a powerful counter to the anonymity the killer sought to impose. Communities have also held events to raise awareness about violence against women and the need for stronger protections. The Green River case remains a touchstone for activists and advocates, symbolizing the urgent need for systemic change to prevent similar tragedies. The story of the Green River Killer is not just about one man's evil, it is about the resilience of those left behind and the ongoing fight for justice and dignity. It challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about society, about safety, and about how we value every life. While Gary Ridgway remains imprisoned, the echoes of his crimes continue to reverberate. The case reminds us that evil can hide behind ordinary faces, and that vigilance, compassion, and scientific progress are essential weapons against it. The Green River Killer's capture was a milestone, but the journey to healing for communities and families remains ongoing. Each story shared, each memory honored, and each lesson learned helps ensure that the darkness he cast will never fully take hold again. As the years passed after Gary Ridgway's arrest and conviction, the long shadow of the Green River murders continued to shape the lives of survivors, families, investigators, and the wider community. While Ridgway was locked away, the emotional, social, and legal repercussions rippled far beyond the prison walls. The case forced a reckoning not only with a horrific series of crimes, but with how society treats its most vulnerable members. One of the most challenging aspects of the aftermath was the lingering mystery surrounding some victims. Although Ridgway confessed to 48 murders and DNA evidence confirmed many, investigators believe the true number could be even higher. Several bodies were never found, and some missing women remain unaccounted for to this day. This uncertainty leaves a haunting void for families desperate for closure. Law enforcement agencies, scarred by the case, underwent serious introspection. The initial failures to apprehend Ridgway despite early suspicions exposed systemic issues, such as jurisdictional disputes, communication breakdowns, and resource limitations. Police departments across the region adopted new protocols, emphasizing interagency cooperation, rapid information sharing, and prioritizing cold cases involving missing persons. These changes aimed to prevent another predator from slipping through the cracks for so long. The Green River Killer case also spurred advancements in forensic technology. DNA analysis, which was in its infancy during the initial investigations in the 1980s and early 1990s, became instrumental in confirming Ridgway's victims years later. Scientists developed more sensitive methods, capable of extracting usable genetic material from severely decomposed remains, enabling the identification of victims previously thought lost forever. This progress has had a profound impact on forensic science worldwide, underscoring how technological innovation can aid justice. Despite scientific progress, the emotional toll on families remains immense. Many relatives continue to grapple with grief, guilt, and the difficult process of moving forward. Support groups formed in the wake of the case have become vital lifelines, providing spaces for shared mourning and healing. For some, public memorials and anniversaries serve as poignant reminders of lives stolen too soon, and the importance of remembering each victim's unique story. The societal impact of the Green River Killer extended to the way vulnerable populations are viewed and treated. Ridgway's preference for targeting women involved in prostitution or struggling with addiction exposed harsh realities about marginalization and invisibility. His crimes highlighted the urgent need for compassion, outreach, and protective measures for individuals at risk. Community organizations and policymakers have since worked to address these challenges, pushing for better mental health services, addiction treatment programs, and housing stability to reduce vulnerability. Ridgway's own psyche remains a subject of intense study and debate. Psychological experts who evaluated him found a deeply disturbed individual with antisocial tendencies, but one who maintained a facade of normalcy in daily life. His ability to compartmentalize, functioning as a husband and father while committing horrific acts, exemplifies the chilling complexity of some serial offenders. Interviews and confessions revealed little remorse, deepening the mystery of what drives such evil. The question of why Ridgway killed so many women, and how he evaded capture for nearly 2 decades, continues to fascinate criminologists and the public alike. His case has been dissected in countless documentaries, books, and academic papers, each trying to unravel the layers of deception, violence, and psychology. Yet no explanation fully captures the depth of his crimes or their devastating effects. One lasting legacy of the case is the increased awareness and advocacy around violence against women. The Green River murders galvanized movements to improve safety measures, educate the public, and support survivors. Campaigns against domestic violence, human trafficking, and sexual exploitation have gained momentum in part due to the attention this case brought to such issues. Moreover, the Green River Killer case serves as a sobering reminder of the importance of vigilance and community responsibility. It challenges individuals to recognize signs of danger, to speak out against injustice, and to support those who may be vulnerable. The collective trauma experienced by communities near the Green River has inspired many to work toward creating safer, more inclusive environments. For Gary Ridgway himself, life in prison is a far cry from the freedom he once exploited. Serving multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole, he remains confined in Washington State's penitentiary system. Periodic interviews have shown him as cold and unrepentant, a stark contrast to the raw emotions of his victims' families. In some ways, Ridgway's continued imprisonment offers a measure of justice, but it can never undo the suffering he caused. His crimes left scars that run deep through the fabric of society, touching countless lives in ways both seen and unseen. The Green River Killer story is a dark chapter in American criminal history, marked by horror, tragedy, and loss. Yet it also embodies the resilience of communities determined to seek truth, justice, and healing. It is a tale of evil confronted and contained, but also a call to vigilance, empathy, and action to protect the vulnerable. In remembering the victims, honoring their lives, and learning from the failures that allowed the murders to continue, society strives to ensure that such darkness never finds a foothold again. The Green River Killer case remains a grim but crucial lesson in the ongoing fight against violence and injustice.
Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer case is one of the most baffling and haunting chapters in American true crime history. Unlike many serial killers who are eventually caught and brought to justice, the Zodiac remains unidentified to this day. His spree of terror began in the late 1960s in Northern California and soon became a media frenzy, marked by cryptic letters, taunting phone calls, and a chilling lack of remorse. It started in December 1968, when a young couple, Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday, were shot and killed on a remote road near Vallejo, California. The murders appeared random and brutal, two teenagers in love, senselessly targeted. The police were initially puzzled, but the horror had only just begun. Just 6 months later, on July 4, 1969, another attack shocked the community. Darlene Ferrin and Michael Majo were parked at a secluded spot near Blue Rock Springs Park, also in Vallejo. The killer approached, shot both victims multiple times, and then vanished. Miraculously, Majo survived and provided a chilling description of the attacker, but the mystery deepened instead of unraveling. Days later, the killer made his presence known with a series of letters sent to local newspapers. In these messages, he claimed responsibility for the murders and threatened further violence. What set the Zodiac apart was not just his killings, but his obsession with cryptography. Each letter contained ciphers, puzzles made up of symbols and numbers that he challenged the public and police to solve. Some were cracked, revealing disturbing taunts and confessions, while others remain indecipherable decades later. The Zodiac's letters displayed a twisted blend of arrogance and menace. He mocked the police, boasting about his ability to evade capture and taunting the public with vague threats. He called himself the Zodiac and took credit for several other unsolved murders across California, though some of these claims were likely exaggerated. The media's fascination with the Zodiac only fueled his notoriety. Newspapers published his letters and codes, drawing widespread attention and fear. People were terrified to drive alone at night or visit secluded spots. The killer had created a climate of paranoia, turning ordinary places into scenes of terror. Investigators struggled to make headway. Despite numerous suspects over the years, none were conclusively linked to the crimes. The Zodiac's method of operation was inconsistent enough to confuse detectives, yet distinctive enough to hint at a single perpetrator. He used firearms, but also claimed to have killed in other ways. He sometimes attacked couples, other times individuals. The lack of a clear pattern complicated the hunt. One of the most chilling aspects of the Zodiac was his apparent delight in playing games with law enforcement. He demanded that his ciphers be published and solved in the newspapers, using the media as a stage for his twisted performances. When one of his ciphers was cracked by amateur codebreakers, it revealed a chilling message about killing and torture, confirming the threat was real. Despite intensive investigations, the case remained cold for decades. The police created profiles of the likely killer, a man with knowledge of codes, a tendency toward violence, and a need for attention. Yet no arrest was ever made, and the killings ceased as abruptly as they had started, leaving a haunting void. The Zodiac case's enduring mystery has inspired countless books, documentaries, movies, and theories. Many amateurs and professionals alike have tried to decode his remaining ciphers or pinpoint suspects. Some have identified possible killers, but none have been definitively proven to be the Zodiac. This combination of unsolved violence, cryptic puzzles, and a shadowy, elusive figure has cemented the Zodiac Killer as a true icon of American criminal folklore. His story embodies the darkest intersections of fear, fascination, and the unknown. The police investigation into the Zodiac Killer's crimes quickly became one of the most intensive and complicated manhunts in California history. Detectives combed through mountains of evidence, interviewed thousands of witnesses, and chased countless leads, but the killer seemed always one step ahead. The sense of frustration was palpable among law enforcement and the public alike. One of the early key pieces of evidence was the surviving victim, Michael Majo, who had been shot multiple times but managed to live. His account was vital. He described a man in his mid-30s, stocky, with short dark hair, wearing glasses. Majo's testimony helped create the first sketch of the Zodiac, a face that would become infamous in the media. But beyond descriptions, the Zodiac's own letters were both a curse and a clue. They contained details about the murders that only the killer could know, proving the authenticity of his claims. His writing style was taunting and arrogant, showing a man who relished the fear and confusion he sowed. The first cipher, sent to 3 newspapers, the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald, was a puzzling code made up of strange symbols. It took amateur cryptographers weeks to decode it. The message revealed the Zodiac's chilling mindset, confessing to killing people and implying he would continue to do so. It read, "I like killing people because it is so much fun." This revelation shocked the nation and only intensified the fear gripping the Bay Area. People were terrified to be alone, especially at night or in secluded places. Couples were warned to avoid remote areas, parks were patrolled more heavily, and the police urged vigilance. The killer escalated his communication with the media, demanding his letters and ciphers be published on the front pages of newspapers. He promised more killings if his demands were not met. This unusual tactic put enormous pressure on the press and law enforcement alike, creating a strange partnership with a dangerous criminal. In September 1969, the Zodiac sent another letter, this one containing a new cipher and threatening to kill a school bus full of children unless his letter was published. This dark threat terrified parents and school officials, heightening the urgency of the investigation. Despite the threats, the killings seemed to continue sporadically. On September 27, 1969, the body of a taxi driver, Paul Stein, was found in San Francisco's Presidio Heights neighborhood. He had been shot in the head, and the Zodiac claimed responsibility for this murder in a letter sent just days later. Unlike his previous attacks on young couples in remote areas, this killing was bold and public. The Zodiac's murder of Paul Stein marked a turning point in the case. It suggested a killer growing more confident, brazenly striking in a busy urban area. The police intensified their efforts, but the killer remained elusive. Witnesses near the crime scene provided descriptions of a man matching the Zodiac's sketch, but the evidence was never enough to identify him conclusively. The killer's ability to vanish without a trace after each crime frustrated detectives. Throughout 1969 and into 1970, the Zodiac continued to taunt the police and the public with letters filled with cryptic messages, riddles and threats. Some ciphers were solved, but others remain an unsolved mystery to this day. Amidst this terror, law enforcement agencies worked tirelessly to find suspects. Several men were questioned, including Arthur Lee Allen, a man who matched many descriptions and was a strong suspect for years. Allen had a criminal history and a fascination with knives, but the physical evidence linking him to the murders was inconclusive. Other suspects were proposed over the years, some based on circumstantial evidence, others on eyewitness reports. None, however, have ever been definitively proven to be the Zodiac. This failure haunted the case and added to its mystique. The Zodiac's complex persona, part killer, part showman, confounded investigators. His letters revealed a dark intellect and a desire for infamy. He manipulated the media, police and public alike, crafting an image of himself as a mastermind beyond capture. Psychologists have analyzed the Zodiac's writings and behavior extensively. Many suggest he suffered from deep psychological disturbances, possibly narcissistic personality disorder or sociopathy. His need for attention and control was evident in his communications and actions. The case's intense media coverage also influenced public perception. Newspapers sensationalized the letters and crimes, turning the Zodiac into a figure of myth and legend. This media circus may have encouraged the killer to keep sending letters, prolonging the terror. Despite the fear and frustration, some members of the community refused to be cowed. Neighborhood watch groups formed, citizens became more vigilant, and families took extra precautions. The Zodiac's reign of terror forced a cultural shift in how people viewed personal safety and law enforcement. In the decades since the murders, the Zodiac case has continued to captivate true crime enthusiasts, amateur sleuths and professionals alike. Advances in forensic science, including DNA analysis, have reopened some aspects of the investigation, but no definitive breakthrough has yet occurred. The Zodiac killer remains a haunting enigma, an unidentified predator who used fear codes and manipulation to terrorize a region and evade justice. His crimes stand as a grim reminder of the darkest corners of human nature and the complexities of crime investigation. As the 1970s unfolded, the Zodiac killer case settled into a chilling limbo, a cold case that still gripped the public imagination, but offered few new leads or answers. The killer's last confirmed attacks had occurred in the late 1960s, and the frenetic pace of letters and threats had slowed to an almost eerie silence. Yet the mystery only deepened, and the legacy of fear and fascination endured. One of the most perplexing aspects of the Zodiac case was the inconsistency in the timeline and geography of his alleged crimes. While most of the confirmed murders took place in Vallejo, Napa County and San Francisco, the Zodiac claimed responsibility for killings as far south as Los Angeles, and even hinted at crimes in other states. Investigators often faced the difficult task of separating fact from fiction in the Zodiac's letters, as he seemed to relish weaving false leads and misinformation into his communications. The cryptic ciphers, too, remained a hallmark of the case. Several were sent to newspapers and police, some solved and others stubbornly resisting decryption for decades. One of the most famous ciphers, known as the Z340, sent in November 1969, baffled codebreakers for more than 50 years. It wasn't until December 2020 that a team of private citizens finally cracked it, revealing a disturbing message where the Zodiac taunted law enforcement and bragged about the pleasure he took in killing. This breakthrough reignited public interest and raised hopes that other ciphers might yet yield secrets. Beyond the puzzles, the Zodiac's psychological profile fascinated criminologists and true crime aficionados alike. He exhibited characteristics common to many serial killers: a need for control, lack of empathy, and a desire to dominate through fear. Yet, what set him apart was his meticulous planning combined with an almost theatrical need for recognition. His letters to the press were not mere confessions, they were carefully crafted performances designed to manipulate public opinion and law enforcement.
The media's role in the Zodiac saga cannot be overstated. Newspapers competed fiercely to publish his letters, often unedited and in full, in the hope of eliciting more communication. This dynamic created a strange partnership between the killer and the press, where the media acted as a megaphone amplifying his terror. Some critics have argued that this attention may have fueled his desire to continue, turning his crimes into a macabre form of celebrity. In addition to Arthur Lee Allen, numerous other suspects emerged over the years, though none were conclusively linked to the crimes. Some theories proposed that the Zodiac was a military veteran, skilled in codes and firearms. Others suggested he had medical or psychological training. A handful of investigators and researchers identified suspects ranging from school teachers to police officers, each with varying degrees of circumstantial evidence. One particularly fascinating suspect was a man named Gary Francis Past, a convicted killer who died in 2018. Some amateur investigators claimed Past bore striking physical similarities to the Zodiac sketch and had possible connections to locations relevant to the crimes. However, law enforcement has not officially confirmed any link, and skepticism remains high. Another suspect often mentioned in discussions is the famous cartoonist and illustrator Robert Graysmith, who wrote extensively about the Zodiac, but was never officially a suspect. His books and investigations helped bring the case back into public view, and inspired several films, including the acclaimed 2007 movie Zodiac directed by David Fincher. Despite the intense scrutiny and numerous theories, the Zodiac killer's true identity remains a mystery. The killer's apparent ability to evade capture and the absence of definitive DNA evidence have kept the case tantalizingly open. Some experts believe the Zodiac may have died decades ago, while others speculate he could still be alive, lurking in anonymity. The impact of the Zodiac case extends beyond the crimes themselves. It changed law enforcement approaches to serial killers, influencing investigative techniques and the handling of media relations. The case also raised questions about the ethics of media coverage in active investigations, especially when it comes to dealing with manipulative offenders who seek publicity. For the families of the victims, the Zodiac remains a source of enduring pain and unanswered questions. Betty Lou Jensen's and David Faraday's families never found closure, as their teenagers' murders were just the beginning of the killer's reign. Similarly, Darlene Ferrin's family struggled for decades with uncertainty and the knowledge that the man who took her life may never be caught. Michael Mageau, the survivor of the Blue Rock Springs attack, lived with the trauma and fear for the rest of his life. His testimony was crucial in piecing together the Zodiac's methods, but it was also a reminder of the random cruelty that defined the killer's spree. Paul Stein's murder brought the terror to the heart of San Francisco, an attack that shattered the illusion of safety even in a bustling urban center. His family's grief was compounded by the public spectacle that followed, as his death became a symbol of the Zodiac's audacity and cruelty. The Zodiac's legacy lives on in pop culture and true crime communities worldwide. From documentaries to podcasts, books and movies, the fascination with the unknown killer continues to inspire new generations to seek answers. His story represents a dark chapter in American crime history, one defined by mystery, fear and the chilling power of an anonymous predator who played a deadly game of cat and mouse with society. As the years stretched into decades, the Zodiac killer case took on an almost mythic status, a haunting enigma that captured the darkest corners of the human imagination. With no new confirmed attacks after the early 1970s, the killer's trail grew cold, but the questions and theories multiplied endlessly. One of the greatest challenges faced by investigators was the lack of solid physical evidence, tying any suspect conclusively to the murders. The killer was careful, leaving behind few clues. The forensic technology of the 1960s and 70s was limited, and while modern methods like DNA analysis have since revolutionized crime solving, many of the Zodiac's crime scenes had been contaminated or mishandled in the initial investigations, making breakthroughs difficult. Over the years, multiple DNA tests on evidence linked to the Zodiac were inconclusive, or yielded partial profiles that didn't match any known suspects. In the 2000s, new efforts used advanced forensic genealogy techniques, similar to those that solved other cold cases, but no definitive match emerged. Despite renewed investigations by police and independent researchers, the identity of the Zodiac Killer remains officially unsolved. The Zodiac's ability to manipulate public perception and media made his case unique. His letters were part puzzle, part taunt, designed to confuse, provoke, and ensure his presence remained impossible to ignore. His use of ciphers appealed to amateur cryptologists and detectives alike, drawing them into his deadly game. One of the Zodiac's letters, sent to the San Francisco Chronicle in 1969, famously included a cipher with a message stating, "I like killing people because it is so much fun." This chilling phrase revealed a cold, detached mindset, and a killer who took perverse pleasure in fear and death. His boastful tone added to the public's fear and fascination. The killer's messages also included threats to commit more murders if his letters were not published, making him one of the first serial killers to weaponize the media so effectively. This tactic blurred the line between criminal investigation and public spectacle, complicating the efforts of law enforcement. For the victims' families, the enduring mystery has been a heavy burden. The lack of closure has haunted them for decades. Some have expressed frustration at the perceived failures of law enforcement and the media's sometimes sensationalist coverage. Others have found ways to honor their lost loved ones, creating memorials and foundations to raise awareness about violence and victim support. The Zodiac's cultural impact is undeniable. He inspired a wave of books, films, and documentaries. The 2007 film Zodiac brought renewed interest to the case, portraying the obsessive investigations of reporters and police officers, and highlighting the toll the case took on those who sought to solve it. The Zodiac Killer remains a cautionary tale about the dangers of notoriety and the complex interplay between crime, media, and public fascination. His identity may never be known, but his crimes left a permanent scar on American history, symbolizing the darkest possibilities of human nature. The search continues. Amateur sleuths, professional investigators, and true crime enthusiasts remain obsessed with unraveling the mystery. Advances in forensic science offer hope, but as time passes, the chances of finding definitive answers grow slimmer. In the end, the Zodiac Killer's story is a chilling reminder of the unknown forces that can lurk in plain sight, the fragile nature of safety, and the enduring human quest for truth amid darkness.